So, hello and welcome everyone to this third and the last panel of the day titled Cultural Heritage and Preservation in Times of Crisis. Time, because of its extreme impersonality, has been hailed as the ultimate equalizer and destroyer of all that means heritage to us as humans. However, the poignant images from Timbuktu, the shattered statue of Bamiyan, Buddha in Bamiyan, made us ponder on a phenomenon that is greater than time, which is conflicts, latent or hidden or manifest. This panel, the purpose of it is to explore the psyche, politics, and institutions behind the cycle of destruction and all that means heritage to us, whether be it in tangible or tangible form. We would also like at the same time to discuss newer techniques and methodologies to preserve what means dearly to us. And we are delighted to have esteemed panelists with us. And with this, I would like to call upon Dr. Tofts to begin with the discussion. And I'll start by introducing our esteemed moderator for today. Professor Monica Toft is a professor of international politics at the Fletcher School. And initially, she was also leading the Religion and Public Life Initiative at Howard. And she has a very interesting book, which might be interesting to the audience here, which is titled God's Century, Resurgent Religion and Global Politics, which looks at the role of religion in international affairs. So I would invite Dr. Tofts to kickstart the panel, please.
Okay,
Thank you.
Tatiana. And thank you everybody for being here. This is such an important topic. And I'm sorry I wasn't here earlier. I was actually running a workshop last night and all day today on Afghanistan. So this has been on my mind. And I think this topic, when the RLD team, who should get large shout outs for pulling together such a great conference today, came up with this idea and was developing. I thought it's brilliant because one of the things about cultural heritage is that it doesn't just touch the lives of people physically, but also spiritually and emotionally. And I think one of the reasons why we're having this panel and this conference is that it doesn't touch those people who are in the locales with these statues, monuments, music we're going to hear about, poetry, right? Statues too, we're seeing this actually in Ukraine. Statues are very important figures in the national life of a country, of a nation, are also being targeted, is that it touches us as well. And so we think about not just cultural heritage locally, but also internationally and globally. And as Katyani said, across time. So it's a spatial thing, it's a time thing, and it's emotional, and it's also physical. And the artistic underpinnings, the religious, the spiritual underpinnings are very important. And we know why it happens. Oftentimes it's just simply collateral damage in a war, right? So people take sanctuary in churches, mosques, temples, and those are targeted, unfortunately, and not only the people are harmed or in some tragic ways killed, but then also the buildings and structures themselves. Or it's actually to directly harm opponents. If you're religious or you're spiritual and a religious site gets attacked, a piece of you is taken with that. And so opponents are very good in war about figuring out ways to really deeply scar a people and a population. And then lastly is just sort of the demonstration effect that it can be done. And I think when we get to Bamiyan with the Taliban, particularly under the leadership that decided to take down the statue, it was to demonstrate that darn right, we can do this, sort of sticking it in our faces, that they can conduct this sort of violence and destruction. So this panel is turning to these issues from the destruction of these things, which I know we were talking about it earlier in the day, to the important question of how to prevent it. And then if it happens, how to preserve it and bring it back perhaps, to preserve both the tangible and the intangible elements, and not only for the people, but also for society at large today, and we would hope for tomorrow. And so the question is that we're going to be talking about is what can be done to preserve it, and then what can be done so that shared value for those communities, and then for us as humans. I mean, what makes us unique as humans is the ability to create, right? And the ability to connect. We know some species might be able to do that. We talk a lot about elephants and dolphins, perhaps, with their sense of community. But I think art and the creation of art and the creation of value, intangible value, is really, really important. So we have two amazing guests today to come and present. And in fact, neither of them are guests at Toft University. Dr. Seema Samar is a resident scholar at risk for the next 2 years. So she's going to be in residence here. I'm delighted because she's a global treasure. Culture heritage. We'll talk about her, but she is a global treasure, and she still is an Afghan women's and human rights activist, an advocate, and she's been a social worker within the international forums, and she served as the Minister of Women's Affairs in Afghanistan from 2001 and 2003. She was appointed as a member of the UN Secretary General High-Level Panel on Internal Displacement in December 2019. And she's a member of UN Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on Mediation. And boy, do we need you for that with what's going on in the world. And as I said, she's recently joined Tufts University for 2 years. So it's a real resource that we have here. And then we have Anna Kijas. Do you pronounce the J or Kias? Kias. She's the head of the Lilly Music Library at Tufts University. And again, this is not my area of expertise. Those students in my classroom, Dylan is right up in here, a couple of you. I study violence and war. So I actually look at the destruction of these things and not the reconstruction, unfortunately, although that's very important to me. And I hadn't thought about the music and the digital destruction, and it's so very important. So Anna's going to bring that to us today and talk about that in particular in Ukraine. She has a master's degree in library and information sciences from Simmons College, music with a concentration in musicology from Tufts University, as well as a BA of music literature from Northeastern University. And she's the co-founder of Saving Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Online, which tragically we have to have because of what's happening with the war in Ukraine. So we're going to start with Seema, and she's got a couple of slides. So I think, Anna, you and I maybe go in the front row. And Seema, when you're done, we'll have Anna speak. And then I'll ask you a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So Seema, the floor is yours. Yeah. Oh. Is your mic on?
So coming from a third world country, it shows my ability on using technology. As she introduced me, I'm from Afghanistan. I was the first Minister of Women's Affairs in the country for 6 months only, from end of December 2001 until July 2002. After that, I've been the chairperson of Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. I asked our lovely student to put 2-3 slides to show the Buddha in Bamiyan. Afghanistan is quite an old country, I would say, with a lot of rich history. Unfortunately, of course, the history was not was preserved as it should have been, including the cultural heritage that we did not really take seriously and keep it the way we should have done. And you also know that Afghanistan has been at war since 45 years. So we had a coup d'etat within Afghanistan, then we had the USSR. So every superpower somehow played a role in Afghanistan. So most of the time it's unfortunately negative rather than positive. But by saying that Afghanistan has been an old country and located in the Silk Road, which was one of the civilized road between China and Europe for so many years, and there are some historical remaining, I would say, because most of it destroyed, but there are some historical remaining of those Silk Road when we are talking about. Still in Afghanistan, and Bamiyan was in the middle of the road. In different parts of Afghanistan, we still find when they had the, recently a few years ago, the Chinese got the contract of a biggest copper mine in Afghanistan in one of the province in Logar. When they started to work on the mine, there's another Buddhist temple in there, So that was one of the reasons that the Afghan government wanted the Chinese to be careful not to destroy. But during the war, as Monica said, that unfortunately there's a lot of not only physical destruction in the war, but there's a lot of destruction within the human relationship and behavior. I mean, in a country with 45 years of war and different groups came in power and went, and they looted. Somehow everybody was involved on looting the cultural heritage of the country as much as they could. But if they couldn't loot it because it was big or they could not carry it, then they destroyed it, unfortunately. You heard about the Bamiyan Buddha. It was, I would say, in its own way, it was really exceptional piece of culture or art in the country. There was two big ones. One was the, people were saying it's a man. It was 52 meter high. I think it's about 58 yard. It's each yard is 3, so you can imagine how many foot was it. And the name was Salsal. The people were calling it Salsal. In the history, it came that it is Salsal. I mean, if even the top of the head, I mean, it has a kind of a steps and different small caves, because it was, I think it was the training center for Buddhism or something. It has still very nice places and locations that you could even walk up to the top of the Buddha when it was standing. The second one, which was more or less looked like a female, and the name was Shamama, and it was 36 meter high. This too was the two main figure, but it was a lot of other small Buddhas. The people were saying sitting Buddhas in different caves. Unfortunately, all of them were destroyed. I think one of the issue, unfortunately, was that the misuse of religion as a weapon of war in Afghanistan, that's used by different, unfortunately, it was also used by the Western countries and Arab countries to train the Afghans and try to use the religion as a weapon of war to defeat the USSR long ago. And that was still used as a weapon of war in order to control the people. So they announced that it is, I mean, there was big fight between the Hazaras and between the Taliban, and then they put really a sanction after the loss in 1998 in Mazar on the Hazara areas, because this Bamiyan Buddha was located in Bamiyan, and Bamiyan is the main area for the different ethnic group. Then we have different ethnic groups in the country. We have Pashtuns, we have Tajik, we have the Hazaras, we have Uzbeks, a lot of other small tribes such as Baloch, Pashais, and so on. Because it was located in the area where look to the majority of the people are the Hazaras. So that was one of the reasons that the Taliban took this action. They announced that they are going to destroy it, but it was not a very active pressure on the Taliban not to do it. It was some, like Sri Lanka came with some proposal, Thailand came with some proposal, Japanese said that they're willing to build a wall in front of it, not to be seen by the people. Nobody was practicing Buddha in Afghanistan, not much. I mean, at least I don't know any Buddhists. Our own, let's say the majority of the Afghans, we had Hindus and Sikhs, but usually they were not going to Bamiyan to worship the Buddhas, which was standing. But the Taliban mentality was in general against civilization. So that's why one of the reasons that they took that decision. So it was not a lot of diplomacy, a strong diplomacy against Taliban to stop them from the destruction of the Buddha. And finally, they decided that they will blow up the Buddha in March 2001. So they did. And they were so restrict because they, I mean, you really find very 2-3 images because they were not allowing photograph. They were not allowing filming, of course. The one who took photograph must be a brave person because cameras were not allowed. It was enough to be put in prison, even to be killed using camera and photograph on that time. This is first time of the Taliban government. So the Buddha was destroyed, unfortunately. But I think it is such a, we all know it, destruction of cultural heritage is during the war is a war crimes. And that was happening in the in Bamiyan. And they also destroyed a lot of other small statues, which was the Kabul Museum had a lot of statues. I mean, they had a lot of small pieces and big pieces of cultural heritage in the country, including a lot of Buddhas. The Mujahideen, which was before Taliban, actually destroyed the museum, and they took what they could carry. I was in the museum in 1993. I just went and I saw the destruction, but few bigger Buddha, which was stone, and it was difficult to carry them, was still there. And we had a very committed Afghan who was heading the museum. He was able to take some small pieces and put in a corner and build a wall in front of it so the Taliban could not see it. So he was able to preserve some of them, but not the big one because he couldn't carry the big ones. It was heavy. Those were also destroyed by the Taliban, and there were some Buddha in Ghazni and some other part of the country which was unfortunately destroyed. So I think the regimes or the dictator leaders, why they do the destruction of the cultural heritage during the war or without war, they have some reason for it. One, most of the dictators are not in favor of civilization. So having this kind of cultural heritage in Buddha and those structure in Afghanistan was a sign of civilization. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw a marriage certificate 1,700 years old in Bamiyan, in detail of the name of the wife and the name of the husband, the amount of the piece of land that the husband was given to the wife during the marriage as a meher. This is, I was shocked because we didn't have this kind of civilization in the last 20 years. I mean, we fought for a good marriage certificate to exist in Afghanistan because we had a lot of violence against women. We wanted that marriage to be certified by the government. So one, I think it's because they don't like the civilization and they act against civilization. Unfortunately, Taliban was, I keep saying that Afghanistan is quite rich among the people and capable people. It's not what you see only in the media, men with a long beard and aggressive faces and aggressive appearances with their gun, and women under the burqa with no face and no actually identity. That is not the real Afghanistan. Real Afghanistan has a lot of good people and a lot of very, very rich history. So that was one of the reasons. The second reason, I think, usually the dictators are destroying this cultural heritage to create terror among the population and to show that they have this aggressive attitude, and it's easy that way to control the people. I mean, one of the way that they want to control the people, it's of course aggression and imposition of different opinions and ideas. Third, I believe that maybe the location of the Buddha, because it was located in Bamiyan, and that is mainly the Hazara area. They were already had a lot of discrimination against the Hazaras, mass killing and mass graves of the Hazaras during the first Taliban regime. And unfortunately, even now, we don't know who does it, but it was a lot of mass killing against the Hazaras. So they did it because the location was also important, and it can be one of the reasons. Although they don't dare to admit it, but they proudly said that they were part of the destruction. Fourth, I think, if you look at the previous photograph, before the destruction, the face of the Buddhas were cut. People were saying that because it looked like the original people, or the native people in Bamiyan, so it was cutted by the previous regime due to the ethnicity and so on, not to be seen. I mean, although even in those caves, there is some drawing, and it shows the face is very much look Asian face, I would say, because the Hazaras looked very much like the rest of South Asian people. So that was also one of the reasons that maybe they destroyed it. I think the fifth point would be they wanted to have to draw the attention of the international community to themselves, to their power. And sixth, I think they wanted to show to everyone that we don't care what we are talking about, the cultural heritage and its war crimes or crimes even against humanity. We do what we want to do. And clearly they use the religion as a weapon of war and for the destruction of the Buddha. And I think the other point, seventh reason for the destruction was the culture of impunity. I mean, they saw that nobody keep anyone accountable for what is committed in Afghanistan, what is the war crimes and crimes against humanity, which was committed in Afghanistan. When Taliban was in power, it was around 22 or 23 years of war in the country. So they were thinking that who's going to keep them accountable for commission of war crimes and destruction of the Buddha. So the whole culture of impunity in the country encouraged them to take such an action. Finally, I think that the regimes which do not have the support of the people, by doing all these aggressive action, they really try to control the people and tell them that we can do anything and nobody is there to ask the question and bring us to justice. So I think, again, using the religion as a weapon of war and did all these destruction, which is really important. And I think there's a lot of lessons can be learned from what's happened in Afghanistan in the last 45 years of war. Our new generations, I don't know if we have Afghans here, but our new generation have not seen any normal life under the rule of law, even the last 20 years, the involvement of the international community. We were living it in fear all the time. There was the possibility of landmine, there was possibility of suicide attack, there was possibility of magnetic bombs that they were using recently. I'll stop here and thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any question you have.
So let's turn to Anna. Anna, you don't have slides, do you? Oh, you do, great. Oh, so then I can move to
Thank you again for the invitation to be here today. I'm very happy to talk to you about the initiative Saving Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Online. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what this initiative is and then walk you through some of the work that we've been doing. I'll start by telling you a little bit about how it started. So as you heard earlier, I'm a music librarian. I have a background in musicology and music performance, as well as libraries and information science. And so when the invasion occurred on February 24th, 2022, I was watching the news like everyone else and seeing what was happening. And the week after the invasion, I was scheduled to be participating in a music library conference. And as I've done before, I run lots of different workshops. And one of the things I thought I could do is do a web archiving workshop with my fellow colleagues and focus on Ukrainian library collections that had music materials. So that was sort of the initial thought behind, how I could help as one person. Now that grew into this larger initiative that we call Sucho. I started speaking with colleagues in digital humanities, in libraries and archives, and thought, okay, maybe there's actually more that we can do beyond just web archiving the music collections that we know of. And so we wanted to think more broadly. And so that's what we did. We said, we're going to focus on trying to web archive, and I'll talk about what that means, as many materials, metadata, digital contents, materials from archives, museums, libraries, and all sorts of different types of cultural heritage institutions, including small rural societies that have really important folk life artifacts, or tapestries and other costumes and jewelry, for example. So this continued to grow. And so within the week following the invasion, we had over 1,500 people sign up to help from around the globe, from 38 different countries. People who speak multitude of languages, have different backgrounds. A lot of the folks who are helping us are librarians or archivists or have some kind of technology background. Many of them are scholars themselves and are historians of art or art history. And so we started working by using some web tools to do web archiving. And we wanted to focus, as I said, on these different kinds of digital materials. So on a website, for example, that a museum has, you might find images of all of the artifacts or a good percentage of the collection online. Those images have metadata attached to them. There's potentially information about scholarship and citations to other resources. So all of that data we were trying to web archive. And so within the first few months of the project, we started to web archive and have up to around 50 terabytes of data. And that's around over 5,000 websites that we were able to web archive. At the same time, while we were doing this web archiving work for the first half of like the spring into the summer, we started to consider what else we could do for our colleagues who are physically on the ground in Ukraine. And so that's when we started to think about actually sending digitization equipment to our colleagues so that they could prioritize what they needed from their collection to preserve it. So let me tell you a little bit about what web archiving is and why we're doing emergency web archiving. So you might think, well, if it's online, it's backed up. It's in the cloud. There is no cloud. The cloud is what you see right there. It's servers, it's equipment, it's cables. They run under the ocean. They run, they're sitting in a closet somewhere in your university, in this building, perhaps somewhere else on campus. So all of the stuff that you put online, so you take a photo with your phone, it goes to maybe your iCloud account, it goes to your Google Drive, somewhere else. It's sitting on a server. And so when we think about all of the digital artifacts or surrogates of physical cultural heritage, so images of monuments, images of maybe archaeological artifacts or costumes or jewelry, paintings, and so forth. All of those digital images and all of that data about those objects are on servers, and they can be damaged, they can be destroyed, and that has been happening throughout this war since February. And of course, before that as well, since 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea. They have been attacking the infrastructure, not only the physical infrastructure, but the networks, the internet, and anything that's online. And so this online content is very, very fragile. And for the internet currently in Ukraine, much of their websites fluctuate in terms of their network activity and the presence online. Any given day, institution like the National Library, for example, in Kyiv, their website might go down. The Kharkiv State Archives website was down for weeks and weeks and weeks. Many museum sites are completely inaccessible or have been hacked, and you can't retrieve anything. So this is why we do this type of work. This web archiving work basically consists of a variety of tools that we use to not only scrape contents from the websites, for example, but also to take the content and move it somewhere safe so it can be preserved. So all the files for those images, the metadata, all of that information that is sitting on the servers, we've been able to pull it and to store it safely so that those institutions can then have that content back after the war. And they can, not have to start from scratch in terms of rebuilding their library database of artworks or books that they've digitized, or museums that have artifacts on their website in their collection. And just to show you, so this goes back, I think, to October. Yes, so this is just a snapshot. Within Sucha, we have a variety of different working groups. One of our working groups is what we call situation monitoring. So we're actually monitoring the attacks on the networks in Ukraine. And some of this is public knowledge. You can look it up. There's Twitter accounts that are posting information about this. There's media that also discusses network outages and cyber attacks. Microsoft has been doing analysis and scans of networks that are being attacked and cyber attacks across the globe. And they had a report in the spring of 2022 focused on Ukraine. And they found this same thing we found, which is that the infrastructure, the internet, and the various technology that Ukraine has suffered malicious cyber attacks since before February 24th. The chart here just shows you this. The blue line is the Ukrainian websites. And you'll see how the fluctuation is quite drastic. And so in the beginning, the first few days in October, there's this really big drop because certain infrastructure was attacked. And then later on November 15th, when there was this massive attack of multiple missiles, I think it was in Kharkiv, or I can't remember exactly now, you see how it drops 40%, more than 40% of the Ukrainian web content was down. Some of that came up, but a lot of that content has stayed down. And so, speaking to why dictators, why governments, as you did, attack cultural heritage. In Ukraine, we know that it is a direct attack on culture, identity, and place. Putin has said this himself, right? Ukraine doesn't exist. There is no Ukraine. This has been the rhetoric that has been coming out of Russia for a very long time. And so this is directly the fact that they are attacking these cultural heritage objects, physical objects, monuments, buildings, the online content as well, these different government websites, for example, all of that is directly attacking the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian identity itself. These are just a couple of quotes that I wanted to put out there that, kind of say the same thing, right? This book the quote from the top here is from a recent publication called The Preservation of Art and Culture in Times of War, which is really great. If you're interested in this topic, I encourage you to take a look at that book. And so that this is happening across Ukraine. They're targeting these sites on purpose. So there are a number of different organizations that are doing analysis through satellites, through on the ground means, and gathering information about what has been physically attacked, what is potentially going to be attacked, and then verifying it as well. So what you see on the map here is the darker the shading means the greater the damage, right? And so over 1,600 cultural heritage sites have potentially suffered damage. This is a report from the Conflict Observatory, which is a group of different organizations in the US working with Ukraine. And then UNESCO has verified as of February 1st this month that 238 sites have been either completely destroyed or suffered major damage. These are cultural heritage sites that they are looking at. And so the majority are religious sites. So again, religion, they're attacking people's identity and memory. Museums, buildings of historical and artistic interest, monuments, libraries, all of these places contain thousands of artifacts, of materials, textual material as well as artistic, creative materials. And so again, it's all about the Ukrainian identity and who gets to decide whether or not there is a Ukraine. These attacks on cultural heritage are being monitored, as you just saw in the map before, by the Conflict Observatory, by UNESCO, but also in Ukraine by regular citizens. So the Ministry of Culture has this crowdsourced database where any person in Ukraine can identify a building that has been attacked, a monument, a statue, and identify it in this list here, and they add it. And then they're recording this as potential war crimes because attacking cultural heritage is a war crime. And so they're trying to compile all of this evidence, right, in order to then demonstrate that war crimes have been committed not only against the people of Ukraine, but against the cultural heritage as well. And these are just a few of the disturbing images that we've been seeing coming out of Ukraine, of different sites that have been bombed, that have been shot at, that have been destroyed or damaged or looted. So you see there's a photo here from a museum in Melitopol where the Russians came in and looted the Kherson Museum art collection. These other images are just of museums or libraries that have been completely destroyed from the outside and the inside. Here's some other images from Taras Shevchenko University, which contain images from their libraries that a missile exploded in front of the building, and this is what happened on the inside, right? So this damage is really, it affects these physical materials as well as the digital content that we have been working with. So here are a few ways that Sucho has been helping. So in addition to doing this web archiving work, in addition to sending digitization equipment and other equipment to help the colleagues in these different museums, institutions, libraries, and so forth, do their work during this war, which they are doing. They're scanning, they're packing and moving artifacts to preserve them and to keep them safe. We have been building this community of different experts across the globe. And we've been working with our colleagues in Ukraine to have conversations about what can we help you with? What do you want to do if we send physical equipment over? We've been, in addition to collecting all this information, we have been describing it with metadata. So we're curating it in order to then make it easier to hand back. And we are, by giving presentations like this, we're raising visibility. We're advocating for this need and a greater need, not just in the United States, but worldwide for universities and institutions that have more resources to be able to help other institutions. Because unfortunately, what we're doing with Sucho is something that we don't want to have to do again. We don't want to have to do this rapid response emergency web archiving every time there's a natural disaster or a war breaks out. And you can't digitize everything, we know this, but you can prioritize and you can try to identify, what are the pieces of cultural heritage that really need to be safeguarded and even just, inventoried. So if you think about libraries and archives, we have catalogs, we have finding aids. Just making these inventories of what it is that we have is really important. And in some cases, countries or regions in Ukraine and other areas of the world don't even have that information. And so when an aggressor like Russia comes in and loots your cultural heritage, you don't have the proof to tell the world that you even owned that or you had that contents in the first place. So the work we're doing with the web archiving and this metadata is also kind of compiling evidence. It's compiling this inventory of what we know Ukraine has. And so I think I'm just going to walk you through these here before I wrap up. As I mentioned in the beginning, over 50 terabytes, over 5,000 websites we've web archived across regions in Ukraine. And this is just a short list of these cultural heritage institutions that we have focused on. But as you can see, everything from archives, libraries, monuments, places of worship, archaeological sites, historical buildings, everything where people make memories, people build, create, they maybe practice traditional folk music, or they are children in a public library drawing pictures of their favorite memories, things like that, right? That's where culture happens. And this is just a kind of a smattering of what we've web archived. So this contains things like manuscripts, literature, artworks, music, folk traditions, archaeological artifacts, photographs, and more. There's so much that we've been able to safeguard and to web archive that represents a very wide range of different cultural heritage in Ukraine and people being engaged in culture and community, like the children here on the bottom right. That's an image from a public library that created born digital content. So there is no physical photograph necessarily of that they posted, right? They uploaded it to their website and that's where it's stored somewhere on a server, of these children who are engaging in a day of Ukrainian language. And we've been donating equipment. And so we've been able to donate to almost 37, a little over 37 Ukrainian institutions. Again, from very small museums, libraries to national archives, national universities, sending them not only these really large scanners that you can see in the right corner, which they're putting to work immediately. As soon as they got this, they unpacked it. They made a YouTube video, which you can find online, of them walking through and unpacking and scanning materials. And they're so grateful that they can do this work while the war is happening. They are there scanning rare materials so that they can have a backup copy and evidence of that artifact in case something does happen to it. Generators, right? We know that electricity has been shut down for the most part. There's only a few hours a day where they have access. And so sending generators, protective materials and gear. And as I mentioned before, some of the work that we've been doing with web archiving has focused on not just the tangible cultural heritage, but also on the intangible, the community aspects of it. And so these children here on the bottom left, we've received a video and images of this art contest where these children were drawing pictures of things they remembered from before the war, of their life in Ukraine, and we're helping them create a gallery. We're digitizing those materials and we're creating a gallery. we sent over a scanner so that they can make sure that they can also digitize those images in-house. And these are community hubs, right? Libraries are community hubs. And so not only are those physical artifacts important, but the people who are meeting in those spaces. And to wrap up, we're thinking about preventing future loss of cultural heritage. So physical cultural heritage, of course, is something that many different organizations like UNESCO, Aleph, Blue Shield, ICOM, et cetera, have been thinking about protecting and have been protecting for many, many years, right? Especially since World War II, when they wrote the convention, 1954 Hague Convention, and all of these different documents about protecting cultural heritage. But we are now working with UNESCO. We're working with the Ukrainian Library Association and IFLA, the International Federation of Libraries and Archives, to think about creating a national digital library of Ukraine. And what does that mean? And so we are working in community with colleagues in Ukraine to identify potential platforms, to identify metadata standards. How are they going to train people? How are they going to prioritize what gets digitized and so forth? And so this is an effort that is going to take a while, but we're having these conversations now, and we're starting to think about it together so that in the future, protecting physical cultural heritage will have to continue, but we will also have the digital side, also represented and hopefully protected and preserved. So I think I will stop there. Anyone can help. So as I said, we have over 1,500 volunteers. We have many different types of tasks and kind of mini projects that we've built off of Sucho. So if you're interested in helping, feel free to go to the website or scan the QR code. And we also are raising money for those donations of equipment. And so if you can help, please feel free to do that too. So I'm happy to take questions and talk with the other panelists and the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And really, thank you for your efforts. It's tremendous, it's monumental, and quite overwhelming, actually, when you think about how do you preserve a culture. When there's another culture coming your way, try to deny it, either co-opt it some ways, I think, or destroy parts of it. And similarly, in the case of the Taliban's destruction of the Bamiyan Buddha, I mean, there were other efforts to try to destroy it in the past. Tragically, when Taliban leader Omar was asked about that, he was told this is a violation of Islam. You're supposed to respect other religions. His remark was, well, they didn't have the technology to destroy it earlier. I do. And he did. And so here we are dealing with that. So one of my questions to you is, Seema, is what could have been done to prevent it? So that you mentioned, so the 3 countries that had recognized the Taliban in power in Afghanistan, UAE, the Saudis, and the Pakistanis pleaded with them not to destroy it. The Japanese, the Chinese, the Sri Lankans offered funding, efforts to move them perhaps, and the Taliban wouldn't have it, right? In part because of the reasons you outlined, that this was a form of power that they were holding over the global community. The UNESCO World Heritage Site, everybody's pleading, please don't do it. And they basically held it hostage, and then they ended up killing it. So do you have any ideas, insights about what could have been done to prevent that destruction?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, that 3 countries who recognized Taliban first regime in Afghanistan, which was Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Emirates. I think we are, the majority of Afghans are suspicious of Pakistan because we think that we have more rich and historical presence than the Pakistanis, which is younger than 100 years. Maybe they were behind. I mean, they were not honest with the international community or with Afghan people. So I don't know how much they really tried to stop Taliban from the destruction of the Buddha. And Emirate and Saudi also, I mean, Emirate is quite new. country. I think the international community was not seriously pressurizing Taliban to stop, not to do it. I mean, yes, they were saying that we tried to do this. I mean, it was not easy to move them. That was something which is, I think, seeing Buddha myself, it was not easy to do because they were made in the practically, it's not stone, but yes, it's carved in, and it was attached to the actual behind whatever the earth is. I don't know exactly because I'm not sure how it geology. I know, yes. So it is not a stone, and it's not really soft mat. But then they didn't really pressurize. First, they were thinking that they will not do it, so they were just trying to say this and try to get some money. And then they did it actually, and they made hole, and they hang somebody from the top in order to put the explosive and diamond in the and then they were shouting happily, Allahu Akbar, which is God is great. We don't really do that when we do destroy the solid things. I don't know. For us, it was shock because I was saying, okay, if there's a human being, I mean, a live person can take a gun, take a stone, fight against you, or take a stick, or do some damage to you. But what these Buddhas, which was standing for 2,000 years over there, what they would do to you. But clearly it was against the civilization. So we don't know the actual, because they were really restrict on the dissemination of information. On the first round of the Taliban regime, because we had only one television which was blocked, and we had one radio which was completely under their control. Freedom of expression and freedom of media was not there actually. As I said, when somebody found with cameras, or they were going around in the city, if somebody's light was on after 9 p.m., they were jumping inside the house and punishing the people because they might have been watching a film or something. So it was really, I have to say that it's not enough information about it. And they're not disclosing it.
So you don't think much could have been done to prevent it? They were determined and they were going to do it.
Yes, I think I think what was not really pushed was nobody told them that they will be accountable and it's a war crime. And they will be, somebody will keep them accountable and take them to somewhere.
So thank you, Anna, for your presentation. I mean, to me, that shows, I'm a student of nationalism and sort of the nasty side of nationalism. There can be upsides, uniting a community and giving them strength and, developing language and culture and all of that. But I think it shows, sort of the nasty side of nationalism and the importance of archaeology. I mean, I think Bamiyan also the importance of archaeology. And I remember working on my first book on Abkhazia and the Georgians and the Abkhaz fighting, and the Georgians willing to concede that the Abkhaz had been there for 200 years, but not 500, because it mattered who was there first, right? And I think we're facing a similar thing with the Ukrainians and the Russian, like who has the right? Who is the true nation, or what aspects constitute the true nation? And so as you're approaching your project, how do you decide what elements are the most important to preserve? I mean, you've got 50 terabytes. You're doing everything. You've got to do countryside, so all the folk arts, but then you want to do all the stuff in the main museums because they're in the main museums because they're seen as the most valuable or the most indicative of what is the nation. But then you have theater, which is ephemeral. One of the things right now, we're in a theater and you're watching us live. There's a reason you're doing that, because it's really neat, because we can all hear each other breathe and we can watch each other's movements. how do you capture that, right? Very difficult. Do you ask people to put on a performance of a very famous play and then you videotape it because then you know you've got that play? At least it was live in that moment. So how do you decide that? It's a big decision.
Yeah, that is, it is a big decision. I mean, I think when we started web archiving, we looked at, okay, where are all the museums and archives and libraries? And then we started looking at the monasteries and then the synagogues. And we looked at the, different cemeteries, for example, different sites. We weren't picking what we wanted to prioritize. We wanted to just get sort of everything. Now I mean, it's impossible, right? But one thing you can do is you can actually buy a list of all the domains in a country. I don't know if you knew that. So you can see how many websites there are in Ukraine with the .ua domain. And you can then start to, pick out, okay, these are all the cultural heritage institutions. And so we had across our volunteers scouring Wikipedia, Wikidata, different library resources, archives resources that listed out all of these different institutions. And just, I mean, with web archiving, one of the simplest things is if you've heard of the Internet Archive, they have a Wayback Machine. And you can save website pages by putting in the URL in their Wayback Machine. Now, of course, that's not foolproof or 100% going to be accurate because it depends on the type of website, the type of media, interactive content that might be there. But it's, in some ways, it's as simple as that, is just snapshots of every single page of the website. So while we can't necessarily capture the performance of something that was put on in a theater because we are not there, at the time or weren't there when it occurred, if there's a video of it, then of course we can web archive that. If it's something that, there was a performance, say last week, and the theater had a flyer or a program with the images from maybe some photos from the performance, we can web archive that. So we can't necessarily web archive and save that ephemeral, in the moment, creative performances and processes. We can only get what's on the web. And so with some of the work that we've been doing by sending equipment to Ukraine, so in addition to things like scanners, that big scanner you saw, this very tall scanner for books and rare materials mainly, we're also sending cameras, we're sending hard drives, external drives, generators, power banks, etc. And so people can do their own web archiving or even just capturing things in the moment. And so if there is like that drawing contest, for example, with all those children, they could take photos, they could take videos, they could put those and save them on the hard drive. So we're trying to empower our colleagues in Ukraine to do this work as they can during a war. And we're trying to help with what we can in terms of the web archiving aspect of it. But there's unfortunately no way to get everything, and there's no way to capture everything.
Well, and also I think if you think about it beyond Ukraine, most civil wars are happening in places where they don't have such a big, broad, holistic digital footprint. And you can just imagine, like in a place in Afghanistan, what you lose every time violence and conflict emerges, right? The different kinds of cultural ticks. And as an American, you're just thinking through the process of what would I think would have to be saved, right? I think the American Constitution, run down to the National Archive, get that, the Smithsonian, get that. Maybe Betsy Ross's original flag, the first recording of the Star Spangled Banner. I mean, it's an interesting thing now much of our stuff's digitized, but for other countries, citizens in other countries, when war comes, what do you try to save? And I imagine in Afghanistan.
Can I say something
Sure.
here? I think I really understand the pain the people of Ukraine goes through because we've gone through ourselves the same aggression. And now when I listen to you and now how sorry as an Afghan I am that we could not really save anything. First of all, during the Russian aggression in Afghanistan for 10 years, um, the technology was not as advanced as it is today. So we didn't have much. I mean, there are some photos, but imagine with all the aggression, with all the destruction of whole village, bombing, destruction of water points, destruction of animals, of the people on the mountains, and so on. We don't have images, we don't have photos, we don't have an archive for those. And this is really sad. I think you really do a great job for the helping Ukraine to save all those things. As I said, that we don't have even the photos of every single things that we had in museum. It was not a big museum in Afghanistan, in Kabul, but those are not even digitalized. So imagine how much we lost in this destructive 45 years of war in Afghanistan.
So we have about 25 minutes for questions, and I believe there's mics in the room. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and one of the students will bring you a mic. Oh, here's the mic over here. Are we looking for the mics? Yeah. So Professor Mazarana.
Hi, I'm Professor Mazarana here at the Fletcher School, and welcome to both of you. Nice to see you, Seema.
Thank you.
I had a question. So in the aftermath, in the really quick aftermath of the fall of Kabul, we saw the Taliban putting in the dress codes again, and really kind of repressive dress codes. And then we saw an online movement, which I think was Don't Touch My Clothes or Don't Touch My Dress. I don't know if you were familiar with it, but Afghan women from the diaspora and in Afghanistan were taking pictures of themselves in their traditional dresses, and with all the handicraft and the beautiful work that goes in, just showing all the amazing color and embroidery and decoration that went into their clothes. And I'm wondering if, it was interesting to see that that was a response totally by women about identifying their culture through what they were wearing on their bodies. And I'm just wondering if you could reflect on that for us now that there's an online space. You've got a lot of the diaspora have moved out, and the continuation of culture through, online spaces.
It's a good question. Yes, we were, honestly, we were shocked, and most of us are still in shock. We don't know what to do. You saw the evacuation of the Afghans. Most of the families who got out, or the Afghan, particularly Afghan women who were active more on the civil society movement and activism. We are all struggling on our daily lives. We couldn't think about these things, but I think it's beginning to, with some kind of this kind of activities, but it's not really organized work to do. When you think, sitting here listening to our colleague here, I was thinking, from where we should start. It's so many things. I mean, I've been insisting on the documentation of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Afghanistan. How much we could do? I mean, as I said, that there's no documentation. People do not want to open the wound. And then the people who were old enough, when they witnessed some of the destruction and some of the mass killing during the Russian, for example, either they're too old and they don't remember, or they've gone outside of the country and they don't want to say. The people who were quite young and they don't understand. And a lot of Afghans millions of Afghans who are refugees in Pakistan and Iran, and the children born there, they don't know our own culture. I have to say that we were lost. I mean, imagine all these refugees who came from Iran and Pakistan with different culture. because they've grown up. I mean, including myself, I was in Pakistan and I was wearing a Pakistani dress. When I came to Kabul, I tried to change, not to come with that kind of a clothes. It's so difficult. And for example, I have only 3 photographs of my youth. All the others gone. That's the 3 photographs that we took in the Kabul University, which was different from today. And even that, this time I couldn't bring it. So imagine, we don't know what to do. But yes, I think maybe we should encourage the young generation in order to start doing all these things. Thank you for mentioning this. And I'm glad that I've been here to look at these issues, because we are in daily survival mode, all of us, and the majority of the people in Afghanistan, surviving on their daily basic needs, trying to have food on their table for their children, rather than looking for archives or historical treasures.
Thank you for that question, Professor Mazarani. So Anna, I mean, I was struck that you guys started your activities within a week, which 2 things talk about foresight, right? Because we all thought that this was going to be a quick war, and here we are almost a year in, and it's not going away anytime soon. Where did the impetus come from? Was it your own brainchild? Was there a precedent for this? And you did mention that there's now sort of a more, not a global, but a more holistic, is it universal, to say we have to start looking and protecting in places like Afghanistan, Congo, Yemen, Syria. I mean, we could go on, unfortunately, about the number of places that are seeing conflict. And then also there was the panel on climate change, right? We have drought, river systems overflowing, and we're going to see villages wiped out and villages with their costumes, right? So where did the impetus come from for the Ukrainian situation? And are you seeing a drive to make this a little bit more universal or global for other places that are suffering and potentially could lose their sort of cultural heritage?
Yeah. So, I mean, the impetus, personally, I wanted to do something. And so, so as a librarian, you may not know that, librarians do a lot of different things. We don't just have, collections like music collections or other materials, but I have training in doing digital curation and in digital humanities, thinking about metadata and databases. And so all these things, when I was looking at, how could I help? I thought, okay, well, I know how to do some web archiving. So I'm going to teach other people how to do the web archiving, and we'll start there. So it was just sort of like, that was my reaction. I do a lot of advocacy work in my own community. I do a lot of social justice work in my professional and personal life. So for me, this was a way that I could help. And using my own expertise in, librarianship and musicology, I thought, okay, I can help in this way. But I wasn't the only one thinking about this. So my colleague who's a co-founder, Sebastian Meisterovich, he's in Austria. He was thinking about this too, because he's a public historian. And he was thinking about, how can we start just taking all the stuff from the web and making sure that it's archived in some way. And so he started web archiving on his own. And we basically just started putting a message out on Twitter saying, hey, does anybody want to do this workshop? Do you want to do some web archiving for Ukraine? And we, within the first, maybe 2 days after the invasion, we connected. We had some Zoom meetings. We brought in people from the Internet Archive, from the Ukrainian Research Institute at Harvard, from University of Alberta and other places. And we said, let's just do this. And we just did. And we trained people. I did, and I'm still doing lots of education about how do you web archive, which tools do you use, how do you describe things with metadata. We started doing all that. So, it was a few different people thinking about the same thing and just having conversation and saying, we're not physically there, so we can't help with, safeguarding and moving things and protecting things, but this is something we can do to help. And I think the second part of your question was,
is this now becoming
yes, the universal,
institutionalized as a reaction to conflict?
Yeah.
Recognizing that, and we know this, right? That when war comes, cultural sites are attacked for all the reasons that we confront inadvertently, but many times tragically on purpose.
So there's a few different ways that this has and is, I think, going to be more universal. I mean, in the case of this particular war, in this moment, the technology and the different tools that are available that do not require a high level of technical understanding is really key, because going back 10, 15, 20 years or longer, you just didn't have that kind of technology. You had to be a programmer to be able to know how to web archive, right? You can still do programming to do some advanced work, but you don't need to. You can use a basic tool like the Wayback Machine. There are libraries and archives across the globe, many of them, in the United States as well, that do web archiving regularly. And so Tufts does this. For example, our archives, they have particular collections that they are looking after in physical collections. And then they also identify, which websites they're going to web archive, and they have a tool that they use for that. So different institutions have identified collections of websites, for example, associated with things like the Black Lives Matter movement, with different, unrest happening across the globe. So that is something that has been going on for a while now. I think in terms of this kind of large scale effort, as I said in the presentation, we don't want Sucho to happen again. This is a lot of work. Everyone who is volunteering, we have some retirees, but the majority of us are full-time employees somewhere. And so we're doing this in addition to our regular jobs. It's a lot of work. And, we want to make sure that the communities where this kind of, whether it's a climate crisis or a natural disaster or a war, where it's happening, have the tools that they need so that they can do this work before that happens. And so education is a big part of what we're doing as well.
Dylan, did you have a question?
Thank you. Someone named Baba from Zoom has posed the following question. The panel has discussed archival preservation initiatives extensively. Could you also discuss intangible cultural heritage and how we may preserve it? Thank you.
Want to start?
Well, I think one of the issues is accountability. I think we all have to advocate for accountability and bring those perpetrators to justice. Otherwise, this whole culture of impunity against the cultural heritage continues, and the impunity already fueled everywhere. So,
Just to follow up a little bit. Who was the audience for the destruction of Bamiyan? Was it the domestic population in Afghanistan? Was it the global community? Everyone, everywhere? Who was the audience for that?
well, no, I think only a group of crazy Taliban, rather than for the majority of the people in Afghanistan, that was really a shock.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember that we were crying because we could not stop ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That why someone would do it, would do that such a destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, I asked only because of the question from the student online or member online or member online, who's to hold them accountable, right? So if the audience is domestic population, right, maybe to have recruits to show we're strong, we're Sunni, Russian, or if it's the global community and the global community didn't take a forceful enough measure, how do we hold them accountable?
well, I think that in a conflict country, we know that the domestic mechanism is not strong enough. Otherwise, it will not happen.
Yeah.
So the rule of law is really not there during the war or conflict. I mean, we saw it. I mean, we see it today. The the only country who doesn't have constitution, the only country who doesn't have rule of law. And it's the mentality of people who is in power is the law of the country. So that was the case in Afghanistan. So I don't think in any conflict country, the national mechanism would be able to bring people to justice. So that's why it requires international mechanism. That's why ICC was established. And I think ICC's jurisdiction or responsibility is war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, and invasions or military intervention. But that has to be empowered. And we see that, unfortunately, some of the countries who did not really join the statute, including USA, and they are not really supporting financially and politically. It requires political will. If we really want to preserve their cultural heritage, because it's not only belong to the Afghan people, it's belong to the humanity anywhere. It's not only belong to Ukraine, it's belong to humanity. It's the history of human being. Then we have responsibility.
No, that's right. And that's exactly why they knocked it down, is that they didn't want a global humanity. They want their version of Islam. So for Anna, what about the intangible? So how do you capture the taste, the smell,
Right.
the feel of a culture, right? I guess through storytelling, right? But in a number of cultures, once the storytellers are gone, the stories are gone. So have you thought about that? How do you capture the intangibility of a culture? Those elements that make you smile when you walk in the house and there's chocolate chip cookies, right? It's just, you remember that as a kid, the warmth of that, or I guess maybe macaroni and cheese. But yeah, right? How do you capture that?
Well, I think that intangible part of the culture lives in the people. And so I think that with Ukraine, we're seeing that, they are fighting back and they are holding on to their culture and their identity, whether they're in Ukraine or have left to be safe. I think that, some of that can be captured through, as you said, storytelling, or through oral histories, for example, through documentation, through images, through music, through, creating videos. So some of that can be put into an archival collection or digital collection. But the smell of cookies or your, favorite babka, or something like that, like you can't capture that in a file. But it lives in the people. So you take that culture with you, right? And so I think that that's a really difficult question. I don't know.
Try to collect as much bits.
Right.
And hope for a triangulation, but it's very difficult. I went to college at UC Santa Barbara. Any gauchos in here, fellow gauchos? And when you drive onto campus, the smell of eucalyptus, it just brings me back to a moment in time of being really happy as an undergrad in Santa Barbara. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dana Alvala. I'm a student at Emerson College, and I wanted to ask Dr. Samar a question. You mentioned there was a void left when the Buddha was destroyed. I was wondering if you thought the void that was left, or like the hole that was left, was significant on its own, or if you believe that it should be reconstructed, yes, or why not? Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think it's difficult to reconstruct. First of all, as I said, that it was carved within the place. The place is empty now. I don't think we have the ability to do it again. And if we reconstruct, that is not the same Buddha. People try to use different things. Like there was one Japanese who had a digital image, and during the anniversary of the destruction, they were putting, and people were gathering and having some poem and some program around it. That is not allowed anymore. Two, I think it was quite expensive. Nobody was willing to pay. Three, for the general people who are suffering from poverty and hunger, they think, okay, and nobody give us money or give us job opportunity to feed our children. And now they build the Buddha. Well, another 100 years to come to be another historical place. So it was a controversial discussion, but not very serious because nobody was really honestly committed to build or rebuild the Buddha.
So I think we have time for one more question. Gentleman here in the middle. Oh, we have two. All right, why don't we take the last two to close it out?
Hello, thank you for this great talk. My name is Alex. I'm a Malta student here. This question is for Dr. Samar as well, related to intangible heritage. So, what do you think are the prospects of like ethnographic fieldwork, for example, in Afghanistan, in terms of music, song, and dance always play an important role in preserving stories, preserving rituals, things of that nature. And of course, I'm sure they're region specific or even group specific. I don't know how much of that could turn into a national project, but what do you think the prospects for that are today? And if do you think is it something that could be used as a base to sort of rebuild an identity?
So let's take the last question. So the young woman here.
Hi, my name is Angelique. I'm a political science student in the University of Paris. And I was really interested in your story about the motivation behind Sucho. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about the vision that you have for the future of your website. If you have some key metrics and numbers of what you would like it to become in the future and how you would like to get there.
The first question was, I think, yes, there's no doubt it is important to be done, but it was not done seriously, and it should be done. I hope the young Afghans will do that. Because again, the current situation, the humanitarian disaster which is going on in Afghanistan, there's not much space to think about these issues. And you know that Taliban are not in favor of any music, any dance, or I don't know which kind of people they are, but it's very difficult to guess what is going on in their mind. Sometimes I think that what they see, they cannot analyze, or what? How can they think this way? So hopefully it will be done. It's a lot of work to be done in the country, but I don't know from where to start. My own, I don't know for myself, because I at least I was committed on the documentation of crimes in the country, and I'm still committed on that. I don't know how much you know, because unfortunately the Ministry of Education in Afghanistan during the Republic, he didn't want the recent history of Afghanistan to be part of the school curriculum, which is sad, because it's a reality. Our children should know about the recent history and the violent history of Afghanistan in order to avoid it in the future, in order to learn lessons from the violence committed in the country for so many years. But it requires political will on the leadership. A lot. I mean, we have tons and tons and mountains of work to do in our country, in my country, but everywhere, I think.
So Anna, the future of Sucho?
Sure. So, I mean, the hope is that whenever this war ends, we can take all of the data that we've web archived and hand it back to the institutions. And we're actually working currently right now on creating a public kind of page or database where we're going to have a list of all of the institutions that we web archived from and all of the related collections so that those institutions can see, okay, they web archive my content, I can contact them and get it back. So that's sort of the goal, is to just, get all of that back to them and not own it or control it for any purpose, in the future. In terms of some other work that we've been doing is around training and creating resources for emergency digitization as well as web archiving. And so we've been sharing that documentation broadly with our colleagues and just anyone who wants to access it. All of our website content for the pages and the tutorials and all of that information is on GitHub. So anyone can find it and see it. The data is somewhere else that's safe because we're not giving it away. That's not the goal, is not to take it and give it to someone else, but give it back. And so, we have been already used as a model. Suzhou, we heard from people in Hong Kong who wanted to do something very similar. And so they used our GitHub pages to actually create something very similar and start doing their own web archiving. So I think using it as a model can work. But again, the hope is that this doesn't have to happen again in this way, that people can be more proactive and can do mutual and collaborative type of, whether it's web archiving or digital preservation, rather than have to react and try to grab as much content as they can during a crisis, because you're not going to be able to save everything. And of course, the digital is not going to represent everything that exists in a country and is, cultural heritage, tangible or intangible.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Seema, for being on this panel, but I think more importantly for the efforts that you've done in your careers, your professional life. And this is an extraordinarily important topic. It makes me want to go home and archive all my own stuff, right? It really does. Like, what can I save? So thank you, and join me in thanking them.
Thank you for moderation, and thanks to everyone.
Thank you, esteemed panelists and all the audience online and in person for joining us. We will be taking a short break and reconvening at 3:45 for our keynote fireside chat with Secretary General of Religions for Peace, Professor Azakaram. Hope to see you there. And I would also request the panelists to please stay for a group photograph. Thank you.